Hi, I'm Rachael Beyer. I'm the John W. Emery Family Assistant Curator of Oral History at History, Colorado. I'm here today to talk with you about oral histories and how to collect them. We should probably start off by talking about what is an oral history. Well, at its most basic, an oral history is a recorded conversation between two people, one of whom does a lot of talking, and one of whom asks great questions and does a lot of listening. An oral history is a primary source. That's the type of a historical source that comes from one of two things. One, it was either collected at the time an event occurred, or two, as in the case of an oral history, it's someone who was there at the time and experiencing it, looking back and telling their story. Oral histories are a super cool primary source because unlike other types of primary sources, they often allow us direct access to the people who experience them. There's a lot of things we can find out from Googling these days. We can figure out what people wore during a certain time, what kind of cars they drove, or what kind of food they ate. But by talking to somebody about their experiences at the time, we can find out more. We can find out directly from the inside source, not just what kind of foods they ate, but why they ate those kinds of foods, how they prepared them, and who they shared them with. Oral histories are a really great way to amp up the way that we investigate history and try to find out more. With everything that's going on right now, oral histories are also a really great way to connect to our grandparents, our neighbors, or our friends that aren't in the same location as us, that maybe we've wanted to get to know them a little bit better. Or maybe we think that they're super cool and have a really great story to tell, and we've just never written it down or asked them questions about it. This is a great time to do that. And with everything that's going on right now, oral histories are a really great way to help our grandparents and our friends and our neighbors reduce their isolation, as well as our own, by asking them to spend some time in a conversation with us, telling us about what things were like when they were younger. Today we're going to talk about how to actually do an oral history. We're going to talk about how to write questions. We're going to talk about the kind of technology that you can use to record by phone. We'll talk about what you can do with those oral histories. And we'll also talk about what do you do to wrap up everything once that interview's over. So let's get started. Okay, so let's talk about writing questions. Writing questions is crucial to good oral history interviews. Sitting down and saying, hey, tell me your story, is a great thing to do at family reunions, but it's not necessarily the best way to conduct a formal oral history interview. There's basically two things you want to start with when you think about what kind of questions you want to ask. The first is, what are you interested in? What are you personally interested in learning? Are you interested in music or theater? Are you interested in sports or cars? Are you interested in historical events? Are you interested in the way that women worked in the home or outside of the home? What are you interested in? The other interests to consider are the person that you're going to talk to. If you have a grandparent that loves sewing, that's a really good thing to think about asking questions about. So what are your interests and what are theirs? The second thing you want to consider when you're writing questions is the difference between open and closed-ended questions. So let's talk about what those kind of questions are and how we would write those kind of questions or avoid the problems that come with some of them. So first of all, let's start with the basic types of questions. Those are closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are the types of questions that could be answered with a simple yes, no, or 1 to 2 word answer. These are questions like, what was your favorite food? How did you dress as a teen? What was the first car you drove? Or, who did you hang out with after school? This is questions 101. These are the basic get to know you questions. There's nothing wrong with asking these kind of questions, but let me show you how to amp it up just a little bit. Okay, what was your favorite food? Well, you can amp that up by saying, tell me about eating out as a kid. That kind of question is an open-ended question. You have your basic information and your open-ended question. To try to answer the question, tell me about eating out as a kid, they're going to have to do more than give you a 1 or 2 word answer. They may also include discussion about what their favorite food was, but they're going to tell you a lot more by you asking that question. Now, how would we amp up, how did you dress as a teen? Well, you could say, why did you dress the way that you did in high school? By asking this question, you'll probably also have them answer how they dressed as a teen, but you'll also find out why they made the choices that they made when they were in high school. Okay, what was the first car you drove? Well, you can amp that one up by saying, tell me about learning to drive. That's going to be an interesting story. Maybe you right now are learning how to drive or getting ready to, and the way that your grandparents or your older neighbor learned how to drive was maybe very different than the way that you're going to learn. Finally, let's amp up that question, who did you hang out with after school, to how strict were your parents about you going out? Maybe they'll tell you about curfews or rules that their parents had in place. Maybe they'll talk about how they always had to introduce dates to their parents before they were able to go out with them. You'll probably still find out who they hung out with after school, but you'll find out a lot more information by asking them that next set of questions. All of these are really great ways to approach your conversation with your person that you're going to interview. However, I have one more way for you to really take it up to the next level. Let's go back to our food example. We asked, what was your favorite food? Tell me about eating out as a kid. Here is where oral histories have a great chance to shine above and beyond those other types of historical sources. Because you can ask the person that you're talking to how certain things made them feel. It's hard to find that in books or newspapers or movies or radio songs. How did you feel? Using our food question, maybe they tell you that your parents, their parents were they never ate out as a family. They always ate at home because their parents were trying to save money to send the person you're talking to and their siblings to school. So maybe for them it was worth the sacrifice because then they were able to go to college. So maybe what they were feeling pride and gratitude that their parents were thinking so much about their education and very thankful that their parents made those sacrifices when they were younger. What about clothing? Well, maybe you find out when you ask them how they dressed as a teen and why they dressed the way they did in high school, that their family didn't have a lot of money. And they always ended up with their older brother or sister's hand-me-downs, and they were very embarrassed by that. So maybe they were embarrassed that they were wearing hand-me-downs. Maybe they learned how to sew because of that. Maybe they learned how to do really great clothing shopping at thrift stores. So you can ask them how they feel, and that gives you more information. What about learning to drive? Well, after they talk about learning to drive, maybe they talk to you about the fact that when they were in high school, they had a friend who got in an accident. And even though their friend was okay, they learned how to, they decided that when they were going to drive, they just were concerned about that. And so they always felt very concerned and cautious. And now maybe all of a sudden you understand why that particular person you're interviewing always is making sure that everyone's wearing their seatbelts when they get in the car. Finally, let's go to our social/dating scenario and say, we find out who they hung out with, how strict with your parents, and maybe you find out that they really love to go to parties on Friday nights. And at that party, they ended up meeting their future partner or spouse, which means that those memories, that means that maybe those memories for them means that they feel happy and fulfilled. So I hope that this has helped you understand the difference between open and closed-ended questions being those ones that give you one or two word answer, and how by adding in open-ended questions and then talking to them, asking them about their feelings, really gives you a way to get insider information that you wouldn't have otherwise had. So the questions that we've looked at writing cover just a small number of the many, many topics that you could cover. We talked about cars and clothing, socializing, and food, but there's so many different topics you could talk about. What about social change? Talking to them about women's liberation or the fall of communism or civil rights. What about historical events? Did they live through World War II or the Vietnam War? Did they live through presidential elections that you're interested in? What about their faith practices? What kind of music did they listen to, or what kind of concerts did they go to? Ask them about their parents. Maybe you never met if you're talking to a grandparent, maybe you never met a great-grandparent. Find out about their parents or their family. If you're headed toward being an architect, you could ask them about the house they grew up in, or if you are headed towards civic planning, the town that they grew up in. Ask them to give you details about how they decorated their living room or how their family shared space with each other. You could ask them about their job. Did they go into work straight out of high school or after college? What kind of work did they do? Have they always had the same job? Were they in a union? What was that like? There are a lot of questions about work. What about travel? Family vacations, destination weddings, cruises, all that kind of thing where you go out and explore the world. Maybe they served in the military. You want to find out more about their military service. Maybe you want to push their buttons with talking about politics. What about movies? Did they ever go to premieres or remember really big events? What were the movies in their life that they never forget? Education. What was it like for them to go to elementary school? My mom went to school in a one-room schoolhouse when she was in elementary school, which is totally different than the kind of school I went to. Really different. What kind of education did they have? High school, college, trade school. Maybe you want to ask them about dating and marriage. You can also ask them really big questions. What were the biggest obstacles they faced? Which ones defeated them and which ones did they defeat? How did they defeat those obstacles? What were their greatest successes? How did they achieve that success, and how long did it take them to achieve it? And finally, maybe you want to know, what are they the most proud of? Or who are they the most proud of, and why? So many really great questions. And honestly, you can go out and Google oral history questions, and you'll get a whole bunch more that I haven't even talked about. But all of those are really great topics for developing your questions. And that's how you write questions for an oral history. Okay, so now that we have our questions down, let's talk about technology. There are tons of apps right now that allow you to record phone calls. My suggestion is head to Google and search best free app for recording phone calls on, and then iPhone or Android, depending on what kind of phone you have. The two important things that you want to look for in an app are, one, you want to make sure that they have a way for you to save it off of your phone somehow, that you can either email the file to yourself or that you can back it up to a cloud. The other thing you want to do is the better apps are basically set up as like three-way calling, where you dial the app, you connect to the app, then you dial the person you want to talk to, and it allows you to merge the calls. So it's you, the person you're talking to, and the app basically sharing a line. All of the good apps will help walk you through that process, And to be honest, I'm sure most of you are way more savvy about technology than I am. So if you would happen to have any questions about figuring the tech out, if you're not so tech oriented, my email will be at the end of the video. You can give me an email and I can help out on that. The last thing you want to do as far as your tech is to please test it before you actually go to record your interview. No matter how good you are with tech, just make sure you've practiced it once. Find somebody in your household and say, hey, we're going to practice this. You go in a different room from them and you process the app. You go into the app and you dial the app, and then you dial them just like you would do in the interview that you want to record. The last thing you want to do is get to the day of your interview, think that you've recorded the whole thing, and then find out you didn't. So please test your app ahead of time, whichever one you end up picking. We're almost to the interview, but there are a couple of final preparations we need to make. The first is you need to figure out where you are going to be during the interview. That means you need to find a quiet space. Quiet space is really just something where there's not so much noise going on. You don't want a TV or a stereo or a computer making a lot of loud noise in the back. You don't want someone running the vacuum cleaner. If you live in a house where you have younger brothers or sisters, you want to maybe pick a time when they're quieter, like during a nap. Make arrangements with your family, whoever else you're sharing your home with, to find out when would be a good time for you to make those arrangements that you could have a quiet space, whether it's in your own bedroom or if you don't have your own room, to accommodate that you would have a quiet space to do your interview during. The other thing you need to do is you need to call the person you want to interview and make sure that it's okay with them and to work out all of the plans that need to be made. There aren't a lot of them. There's just 5 things that you want to touch base on. The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you pick a good time for both of you. What time do they want to call? What time do they want to have that conversation? The second thing you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure you get permission to record the phone call. Explain to them how you're going to do it and find out if that's okay with them. The third thing you want to do is agree on a length of time. My grandpa is 92 years old and lives in a nursing home. And I know that he gets tired after about 20 minutes of talking. So I wouldn't want to do anything longer than 20 minutes. Now, if I want to talk to him longer than 20 minutes, maybe I'd make arrangements with him to talk 2 or 3 different times rather than have a really long conversation, just to make sure he's not getting too tired. During an in-person interview, this is something that's easier to just visually see. But since you're going to be talking to them over the phone, make sure you get a good time for the 2 of you to talk. The fourth thing you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're going to share this with other people, that you get permission. Now, sharing could mean all sorts of different things. Sharing could mean that you're just going to share it with your immediate family. Sharing could mean that you're going to send it to uncles and aunts, cousins, friends, things like that. Sharing may also mean that you want to post it on social media somewhere. Hey, look at this interview, really cool interview I did with my grandpa or my next door neighbor. But you need to make sure that they're comfortable with whatever extent, and that the 2 of you agree on who you'll be able to share it with. Finally, you want to make sure they have a quiet spot to talk with you. Sometimes they'll be able to do the same thing you did. They'll be able to pick a quiet space in their house and to be able to do the same thing you did for picking. My grandpa is currently confined to his room in his nursing home, and so I know that he doesn't have that as a flexible option. Okay, we've written our questions. We've figured out the technology. We found our quiet spot. And we've talked to the person that we want to talk to and made all the arrangements. Now it's time to do the interview. Okay, we've made it to the day of the interview. All of our preparations are in place and it's all come to this moment. So let's sit down in our space. We're going to talk to our person in about 15 minutes and we need to do our final arrangements. There's just a few because we've done a lot of the groundwork already. First of all, be near the phone and don't move it. In other words, I would suggest using speakerphone, putting it on a table or on a stand, something where you're not moving it against your ear, particularly if you have longer hair. Sometimes the sound of the hair will end up on the recording. You want to have it just sitting down in one spot where you're not moving it around. The second thing you want to do is have your questions in front of you. Again, the rustling of papers might make some sound in the recording, and so having everything just kind of set up in front of you to keep having to move things around during the interview is a nice thing to do. Finally, maybe you're actually doing this oral history interview with a younger brother or sibling, with a younger brother or sister, with a sibling. In that case, make sure you decide who gets to ask their questions in what order. I myself am the oldest of 4 kids, and we always had a set rotation on how we got to do things in order. I suggest if you're doing this interview with others, that you have a sign for yourself that you can just make into a little triangle and set up on a table that allows you to quietly move the sign around from one person to the other so that each of you knows who the next person is that's going to ask the question. Now you're ready to make your call. So go ahead and place your call. You ring through, you say hello to your person, you thank them for doing this today. Okay, so now you're ready to place your call. Set up your app, ring through to your person, get it all set up. You're on the phone with them, you say thank you, so you say hello. Okay, now you're ready to do your interview. Connect to your app, make your phone call, say hello to your person. Because you're recording your interview, I suggest you start with the following brief script. Your call introduction. You ask the person, do you agree to having this call recorded? They should answer yes. Do you agree this interview can be shared in the way that we previously discussed? And maybe you want to detail that. So you might want to say something like, do you agree this interview can be shared with friends and family by email? Or you may say something like, do you agree this interview can be shared with friends and family and also on social media? Whatever you agreed to in your earlier conversation, that's what you want to state here so that it's clear on the recording that it's okay for you to be sharing in the places they said. Then you want to say your name and location. If you're doing it with a brother or sister, you want to say their name as well. You say the name of the person you're talking to and their location. And then finally, you conclude with the date, making sure to include the year. Now just have your conversation. Ask them your questions. During the interview, there's a couple of things to keep in mind that will help you be a good interviewer and a good listener. Listening. Interviews with people you're talking to, as I said at the beginning, a great oral history is one in which one person talks. That's your person you're calling. One person asks a lot of great questions. You've already done the work for that. And then does a lot of listening. The listening part's really important. And the one hint that I can give you for listening is that you're asking questions about things that happened a really long time ago sometimes. People need time to think back to that time. So don't rush questions. Let there be long pauses if you need to. Give them time to think of their answer and then give it to you. Another thing to keep in mind during the interview is that if you have new questions come up, ask them. If it's a question you didn't think about ahead of time, but they say something and it makes you think of a new question, just ask it. This is your interview. Ask them the question. Keep to time. Keeping to time is really important if you set a time with them ahead of time. So for example, with my grandpa, I'd want to make sure that at around 19 minutes, I tell him, our 20 minutes is almost up and I want to be respectful of that. So I'm going to close our interview up, conclude our interview. And if you want to talk again, I would love to talk to you again. We can plan another time to talk. So you're the one who's responsible for keeping to that time if you agreed on one. And then finally, don't forget to thank them. This is a big thing that you're asking of them, to go back into their mind and to not only share their memories, but the way that they felt about those things. A thank you is definitely in order. Okay, congratulations on completing your first successful oral history interview. Now what do you do with it? Well, save it, The reason we picked the app we did was so you could save it. So back it up to something. Back it up to your computer, to a hard drive, to the cloud. Make sure you have a copy of it somewhere else other than on your phone. Second, if they agreed for you to share it, do so. Get it out to the people that they said that it was okay to share with. If they said it was okay to share on social media, we here at History Colorado would love to hear your interview. I will give you the information for how to do that with us at the end of the video. So what else can you do with this recording? You've saved it, you've shared it, you've completed your interview. Well, if you really want to, you could use it for a school project. It's a great primary source that you just collected. You could do a research project on something that they talked about that you hadn't heard of before that you're now very interested in. Maybe this begins a lifelong passion for you of collecting oral histories of the people that you know. But maybe you'll decide that this really isn't your thing. Yeah, it was fine, I did it. It was something to do during the epidemic. And you forget about it. And in a couple of years, you get a new computer and you transfer all your files over, and that just keeps happening over and over and over. Until finally, someday in the future, you're 60 years old and you happen across this file in your deep in your computer or whatever it is that people are using in 40 years. And you listen to it. And you have the voice on audio of somebody that isn't with you anymore. And you have your voice on audio of when you were the age you are right now. And it gives you a sense of history. It takes you back to this moment right now in history. That's why oral histories are so powerful. Oral histories are powerful because they can transport us through time to hear the voices of people who in their stories are taking us back in time. If you want to hear some of those voices from the past, or if you just want to hear some oral history examples before you launch your own project, I encourage you to visit History Colorado's SoundCloud account, which I'll share with you at the end of the video. On our SoundCloud account, we have oral histories that were collected some of which were collected more than 50 years ago. One of our oldest oral histories that was collected was of Samuel Pinkley White, who was over 100 years old when he was interviewed, and shares his memories of being a child in the 1880s in Colorado. It's really amazing. We also have the oral history of Byron Johnson, who was an African-American baseball player. We have the oral history of Paul Hunter, who was a gay rights activist and leader in Denver in the early movement. We have an interview with Max Cohn, who owned one of the earliest movie theaters in Denver, Colorado. We also have stories of the Dust Bowl, of homesteading, of mining, and all sorts of other interesting things from Colorado history. So I encourage you to visit us there. I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Remember that not only does your person you interview have a story to tell, but you do too. Have one of your friends interview you. My favorite part of my job, being a curator of oral history, is that I have the privilege to collect these kinds of stories and share them with Coloradans across the state every day at my job. And I hope that you will continue to check our website for videos like this and all sorts of other digital and online content that we here at History Colorado are going to be producing for you over the weeks ahead. Again, thank you very much. I'm Rachel. Have a great day.